Good morning. It's Friday, June 6th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 609 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back yet again to the FDD Morning Brief. Some serious drama out of Lebanon yesterday. The IDF issued an evacuation order in the Dahia region of Beirut, the city's Hezbollah stronghold. And then the IDF carried out an airstrike on an underground drone facility. It's a reminder that Hezbollah may be down, but it's not out, and the group still plans to fight again. The Israelis are having none of that. Their vigilance is paying off, it appears, but they must continue to strike a balance between targeting this Iranian proxy in Lebanon and working to empower those actors in the land of the cedars who say they want to fill the void. It's not easy stuff. We're going to continue to track it. Crazy day. Today, we're talking about my least favorite NATO ally, more like a frenemy. Yes, we're going to talk Turkey. It's been a minute since we covered the Turks here on the program, and there's some interesting developments on this file. So I've invited Sinan Ciddi, FDD's resident Turkey guy, our sultan, if you will, to weigh in on the stuff that we're watching. Stay tuned for that in just a few minutes. The United Nations made news yesterday, and boy, was it fun. Yet another anti-Israel measure was up for a vote. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio was having none of it. He had this to say, and I quote, "The United States sent a strong message by vetoing a counterproductive UN Security Council resolution on Gaza targeting Israel. We will not support any measure that fails to condemn Hamas, does not call for Hamas to disarm and leave Gaza. It draws a false equivalence between Israel and Hamas or disregards Israel's right to defend itself." Wow, this is exactly the right tone. The UN has no business telling Israel what to do or when to end this war so long as Hamas, the terrorist group that launched this war, still holds Israeli hostages. Hours later, the Trump administration imposed sanctions on 4 judges from the International Criminal Court who are stalking Israeli leaders on bogus war crimes charges. Rubio again hit the mark, and again I quote, "The United States will take whatever actions we deem necessary to protect our sovereignty, that of Israel, and any other U.S. ally from illegitimate actions by the ICC." I'm going to say it again. The international system has gone off the rails since October 7th, if not long before. The UN and other multilateral organizations are failing to do their job. I'm eagerly awaiting Mike Waltz as ambassador to the UN. Urgent reform is still needed, but it was a good day for the Trump administration, and that should not go unnoticed. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, a rare bit of good news out of Israel on the economic front. Israel's defense exports increased 13% in 2024. The Israeli government announced that defense exports soared nearly $15 billion last year. That's record-breaking stuff. Missiles, rockets, and air defense systems accounted for nearly half of that. And guess what? A whopping 54% of Israeli defense exports went to Europe, up from 36% in 2023. Let's be clear, though. Things aren't suddenly rosy with the Euros. Just this week, Spain canceled a $325 million contract with Israeli defense company Rafael. The contract was for over 1,600 missiles and 168 anti-tank missile launchers. Madrid signed the papers days before October 7th. 18 months later, a spokesman for the Spanish government explained that Madrid's goal is, quote, "a total disconnection from Israeli technology," end quote. Sounds like a boycott to me, and I think we should act accordingly. Headline 2, this is like a fever dream to me. Israel is arming jihadi criminals in Gaza. File this under WTF. Former Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman told Israeli media that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu approved the transfer of weapons to a Hamas opposition group called the Abu Shabab clan. Apparently, Netanyahu greenlit this without the security cabinet's approval. I mean, what could possibly go wrong here, right? Abu Shabab is sometimes described as a gang, other times as a militia. Some even claim there are connections to ISIS. I don't know about all that, but what I do know is that since May of 2024, these thugs have been operating in Rafah under the leadership of a guy named Yasser Abu Shabab. Abu Shabab recently published footage showing its members wearing military-style uniforms that say counterterrorism mechanism on it. The group claims that it's securing humanitarian aid convoys at the border, although some say it's been looting them. Either way, Hamas is ticked, and that's why Israel is sending these Shababniks, Kalashnikov rifles, and more. Headline 3, the Syrian government agreed to give the International Atomic Energy Agency access to former Assad regime nuclear sites. This is a good thing, folks. IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi was in Damascus this week. He met with Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara, who I like to call Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani. Never forget that name. And other members of the new Syrian government. In a briefing after his meetings, Grossi said that al-Shara, al-Jawlani, agreed to give the UN nuclear watchdog access to suspected former nuclear sites. Al-Jawlani also expressed an interest in pursuing nuclear energy down the line. Hell no to that. Thank you very little. UN inspectors visited a handful of sites in Syria last year. At the time, Bashar al-Assad was still in power. Now that Assad's gone, there's an opportunity for the IAEA to gain full access to all the sites associated with Syria's old nuclear program, a program that Israel blew up in 2007, I'll remind you. Grossi says he's confident that Syria's new leaders are committed to international cooperation. That's kind of funny. And he's also hopeful that the IAEA will complete its inspection process in the next few weeks. Yes, I'm a little torn on this, guys. Good news happening, but I still don't trust this government as far as I can throw. All right, it's time for a deep dive with FDD's Turkey program guru, Sinan Ciddi. He'll help us break down Turkey's regional activities and get us up to speed on what's next. So let's jump right in. Welcome back for more abuse, Sinan Ciddi.
Hey, John, good to be back.
Good to have you. All right, so let's start with Turkey and Israel. For more than a year, Erdogan was calling for war crimes charges and even an Islamic war against Israel. I mean, full out calling for the Islamic world to mobilize and attack Israel in response to Gaza. Then that all stopped in February. He's been pretty quiet since. So what's happened?
I think he started therapy, to be honest with you. Okay. I think what's happened is, Donald Trump got elected, and I think Erdogan is playing the long game. I think he's been very smart. I think what he's been very good at is essentially projecting what Donald Trump wants to hear in order to get what he wants, right? So the thing he has put forward to Trump is to say, look, you've got a lot of wants in the Middle East, and I can help you with that, as well as the other wider regions. Notably, we will take care of Syria for you. And we can also help take Ukraine off the table for you. We can be a major stabilizing force inside of Syria. We can build it up militarily. We can secure it. We can get rid of jihadis. We can do all sorts of things for you. And we can be a mediator for you inside of Ukraine. We can give you help to secure peace. We can put peacekeepers in there. We can do a whole lot of things for you. While saying this and whispering all these lovely things inside of Trump's ear, he has certainly tamped down this rhetoric of, death to Israel, end the Jewish sort of state, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because whilst he does that, he makes Netanyahu and the Israeli government and the war on Gaza look unhinged, right? And what we do know with Trump is Trump and the Trump government wants out of Syria, wants out of the Middle East. He wants to reduce military footprints and commitments out of everywhere, just about, as far as we're being told, right? And that's what Erdogan's giving him. So whilst the rhetoric of anti-Israeli stuff has been toned down, I would say behind the scenes, Erdogan is still Erdogan. So what do we always say? What's the old adage? Look at his actions, not necessarily his words, right? So what we do see, put the rhetoric to one side, we see a massive military buildup inside of Syria. We have right now, according to the Turkish defense minister, 20,000 troops inside of Syria, right? And the joke on the street is Turkey now borders Israel.
Yeah, it's not really a joke, is it? The Israelis literally are calling Turkey their neighbors. But let's just get into Syria a little bit. We know the Turks have significant influence with this new regime under Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, not al-Shara. What are Turkey's goals actually inside Syria? I mean, we've seen the deployments, we see the advisors, we see the lira being used, right? We see the influence of Turkey everywhere, but what do they want at the end of the day?
I think that's the million-dollar question. The Israelis are asking this. Policy wonks in Washington are asking this. I mean, outwardly, the Turks are saying everything that everybody wants to hear, which is they're talking about, we're here for stability. We want to build up state capacity. We want to help them rebuild. Syria's in our backyard. We would like it to be a stable state actor so it doesn't fail. That's the outward message they're putting out. I would say realistically, my sort of take on this is, I think, look, Turkey is looking to replace Iran. that we've all been worried about. As you know, Turkey is the new Sunni version of Iran, if not minus the nuclear program for now. And obviously, we've been keeping an eye on that.
That sounds unpalatable, by the way, just for the record.
It is very unpalatable, and we've seen Turkey engage in sort of nuclear deals and signing nuclear agreements with countries like Niger, with building up their nuclear power capacity. But at least strategically, Turkey is really projecting itself as a sort of new hegemonic power in the Middle East, right? We've known since the beginning of the Arab uprisings, but particularly since the beginning of the Syrian civil war, that Turkey has been adamant, that desirous, that Erdogan's had this sort of massive dream to have the Middle East governed by Sunni Arab powers with an affinity or, for Muslim Brotherhood adjacent or governed rule, right? And he's long sought the toppling of the Assad regime. And through al-Jolani, he's basically gotten that, right? I mean, we all know, as you just alluded to, that Turkey was the driving force, sensing Iranian weakness, Russian weakness in December, that Turkey was the driving force that toppled Assad, right? And we saw the Turkish flags hung over the city of Aleppo, right? We've known, and the Syrian National Army, these jihadist militias that Turkey's been bankrolling and arming, they are now in the driving seat, right? And so strategically, Turkey has said yesterday, the Turkish defense minister said, we're not leaving, right? We've seen Turkish military assistance, troops build up, right? Infrastructure, economic deals. They've just signed a $7 billion deal to build up energy capacities. In Damascus, there was a trade fair the other day.
With the Qataris and the United States, that's, we're doing it with them, right?
Right.
All right. So, I think we all get the picture, right? That this is going to be a Turkish Sancak, if you will, a province of Turkey, right? Harkening back to the Ottoman Empire. This is neo-Ottomanism in plain sight. So, okay, now let's get to where the Israeli perspective is. They're wary of Turkey's intentions in Syria. Maybe their hair's on fire, I think, in some cases, because they're trying to figure out what is going on here, right? I mean, how far will Turkey take this? But things seem to have calmed down a little bit since tensions really flared up a couple of months ago. The Israelis started striking assets that it looked like the Turks were trying to take over in northern Syria. That looked like we were really on a collision course, right? But now it seems like things are calming down through this covert channel that has been established in Azerbaijan. So explain to folks, why is Azerbaijan the mediator here? And what do you think they've achieved?
Right, because Azerbaijan is a state which both the Israelis and the Turks have a good relationship with, right? And that's for good, that's the reason why Azerbaijan is trusted by both states to at least have a conversation with.
Yeah.
And the reason why there's a semblance of calm, I might add, is because, look, the Israelis have done their homework since December, right? As soon as the Assad regime fell, they didn't waste any time. Look, there's so much unpredictability that surrounds Israel militarily and strategically and security-wise, let alone Hamas, let alone Iran. The new Israeli policy in the region, especially towards Syria, is we're not going to wait to find out what security threat emerges. If we think there's a major thing brewing, we're going to take it out before it emerges. And that is exactly what we saw in Syria. The Assad regime fell. Within days, the Israelis essentially destroyed heavy military capability that could potentially be used against Israel downstream at any point. The Syrians have no significant military capability that could threaten Israel, and that's what they made sure of. Now, in step the Turks with potential to put in fighter planes, in air bases and heavy artillery and position their sort of troops inside of there. As you said, they've put in, they were going to put these fighter planes in these air bases in Palmyra, et cetera, which the Israelis, carpet bombed and put out of. There's calm because the Turks don't want to sort of engage in this game of FAFO, right? That's the last thing that Erdogan wants. And that's, the Israelis are obviously apprehensive. Like they said, they've got their hair on fire. They don't want a conflict with Turkey. They're talking. They've established a deconfliction mechanism over the skies of Syria in terms of who can fly where. The Turkish defense minister said yesterday, yes, we've established deconfliction, but that does not equal normalization. Now, we don't know where things are going to go from here, but the Israelis have basically said, don't push your luck, right? And the Turks are basically sort of sitting around, but they're still diplomatically very engaged with the Syrian government to see how much they can build up militarily inside of Syria.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that there does seem to be some kind of a contest between the Turks and the Saudis over who ultimately controls the government in Syria. I think that is a contest that is still playing out. But I also would just note that I think, and I think you put your finger on it, that the Erdogan regime would like to be the new Iran. They'd like to have more regional influence. They'd like to have more regional control, maybe some regional proxies. Of course, they are sponsors and patrons of Hamas. Now they're sponsors and patrons of the new HTS government. We're going to see where all this goes, but you get a sense that this neo-Ottoman ambition that this regime has long harbored, that they see an opportunity here. The Israelis have pushed back. I don't know what kind of a green light they're getting. Maybe we'll talk about that in a minute from the Trump administration. But this is complicated stuff. Now, before I get to what's happening in D.C., I do want to ask you about what's happening inside Turkey domestically right now. A while back, we were talking about the unlawful arrest of opposition leader Ekrem İmamoğlu. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people poured out into the streets in protest in Turkey. But then it got quiet. And I don't really know why. So can you explain what's happening on the domestic front right now?
Right. And it's gone quiet because the opposition essentially does not have a finite goal as to what they think they can achieve, right? İmamoğlu, this firebrand mayor of Istanbul, a position which Erdogan once held, right, sought to challenge Erdogan for the presidency by nominating himself as the candidate of the main opposition party to run against Erdogan. And we saw that being reciprocated by Erdogan summarily jailing him. He's still in jail since the beginning of March, and we don't think he's going to get out. So there's been massive protests, and those protests have died down simply because, well, if you don't challenge the regime and try to, what's your goal other than protest the jailing of İmamoğlu's jailing, right? And the answer is, well, Erdogan's like, well, I don't care, cool, protest as long as you want. And he was smart not to get too heavy-handed. So the people have essentially gone home because people have lives to lead. And the economic situation is still as crippling as it used to be. Turkey still has one of the highest rates of inflation in the world. And this is where Erdogan is in trouble still, I would say. Yes, I know we've been saying that for years and years and years. But look, Erdogan's taken the unprecedented measure. And if we could ever say that and never get boring. But look, he has taken the unprecedented measure of jailing a candidate before he's even running against him, which basically says that Erdogan is comfortable with jailing whoever he feels fit to, whoever he feels he's uncomfortable to run against him. He determines who can run against him, which means he may no longer feel he has to run elections going forward, right? So that's where we're at. And
that strikes me as a hugely important thing here to note is that, this is a direct assault on whatever's left of Turkey's democracy.
Right.
And it looks like, if you ask me, it looks like the opposition is just rolled over. And that, to me, I got to say, that is not a healthy sign for whatever is left of Turkish democracy. And I'll just say, I'm watching that and I'm alarmed. All right. Now, I want to ask you what's happening on the Kurdish front, because there, I guess, we've got a kind of a mixed bag of sorts, right? The PKK, a terrorist organization that we designated here in the United States and that used to target Turkey, the Turkish state, has laid down its arms, right? Abdullah Öcalan has actually agreed to do this. The leader of this movement has kind of called for an end to violence. So what happens next here? It sounds like the Kurds are actually being welcomed back into the tent, just as the opposition is getting thrown out on its ear. Is that kind of the way to sum this up, or is there more happening?
Right. It might seem a little nerdy and lost in the weeds, but I think the way to put it to our viewers is this. Yes, the Erdogan and the Kurds are about to sort of engage in this massive peace deal. The only way that I can sort of exemplify this is people are comparing it to what the British government and the IRA sort of negotiating to finally lay down weapons and end the war, or the Spanish government and the Catalans some while ago, or the FARC in Colombia, right? Which that's what is being put up forward. But the big question is, will it come through? And why is Erdogan and the Kurds doing this? Erdogan's only interest in this, if you can sort of suffer this, is because in return for engaging with the Kurds and sort of humoring them, saying, what do you want from me in return for peace? Erdogan wants Kurdish votes in parliament, right? So he can change the constitution And through those changes, he wants to basically be president for as long as he can, which the current constitutional rules and procedures does not allow him to continue. That's all he's in it for. The big question is, can he see this process through? My wager is that he can't. I think we're going to see this deal fall apart. It's not actually going anywhere. There's been no promises made. Nothing is happening other than a bunch of people are talking to the PKK leadership. I think it's going to fall apart. I think there's going to be other avenues for Erdogan to get what he wants. So we'll just have to watch that one.
I guess so. I mean, I will say I wouldn't bet against Erdogan. He continues to game the system. He continues to be leader for life. And I think he's well on his way to solidifying that. But, you know, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe things start to fall apart. That would be good news. But I mean, I think, all right, look, we've just established here, we've got a deeply anti-Israel guy that has been on the wrong side of that conflict. You got a guy that's involved in Syria and has been probably up to no good there. And now we've got a domestic repression problem, right? So domestically, internationally, regionally, this guy is a dumpster fire. And now we got U.S. Ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barrack, who also serves as U.S. Special Envoy to Syria. He's in Washington this week for official talks. Barrack's been a friend to Ankara and a friend to President Erdogan. Some speculate he's going to try to convince Trump to push ahead and authorize the sale of F-35 fighter jets to Turkey. This is something that our organization, FDD, we have been adamant about. We should not be selling this advanced fighter jet to the Turks so long as they're engaging in support for terrorist groups and engaging in domestic repression. But so what's the state of play here in D.C.? Final question to you.
Yeah, again, this is just bewildering, right? I mean, we just thought this would never sort of be, you know, if these rumors of these motions are true, that we are going to see momentum building in the administration to sort of authorize F-35 sales, which, by the way, is just no ordinary fighter plane. It is a strategic stealth fighter, the crown jewel of the U.S. arsenal that we only basically sell to our closest allies because it provides a competitive edge. Given what we've just put forward, we're in a position where Turkey is on the world stage and, you know, basically is an ally only in name, but an adversary in reality. It just bewilders me. But yes, if this were to happen at this very critical juncture, it could really hamper and really do damage to U.S. interests. It could kill American servicemen. It could really hurt our allies in the region, not to mention just say to Israelis, but Iraqis, all sorts of others. Why? Because look, none of the conditions why we kicked Turkey out of the F-35 program have changed. The Turks voluntarily purchased missile defense systems from our greatest adversary, the Russians. They've kept them. They're still there. They haven't moved. They haven't done anything to get rid of them, right? And now they want to purchase, and they're pushing the buck, saying, give us F-35s, give us F-35s. If they get them, right, the whole problem is, yes, they could fly them around, they could do, bomb things. That's not the worry that we have. The worry that we have is they could use, take these apart, reverse engineer them, and the potential that Iran, Russia, and China could have the stealth secrets of the F-35 within, a short period of time. That is the greatest worry. We have spent billions of dollars, but more so than that, to keep the strategic advantage ahead of our adversaries. That is what we're in the fight for, and we should not just give this up. And the way they want to do that is basically, through, congressional moves by submitting basically an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act or an appropriations move, and we've got to essentially try to get ahead of that because this is no joke. It's not just a foreign military sale. This is a strategic blunder if it goes through.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree. I mean, the Turks still hold that Russian S-400 system. And I got to say, it's not just, the Israelis who are worried about what they call their qualitative military edge. We're hearing from the Greeks that they're, worried about this. And I think obviously you're going to have the Kurds. You're going to have a whole bunch of other actors around the region saying, no, thanks. This is not something we want to see. All right, we're going to keep watching that. And want to thank you, Sinan Ciddi, for joining us this morning on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thanks for having me.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. My colleague Anthony Ruggiero has a new piece in The Hill urging Trump to reject the World Health Organization's proposed pandemic treaty, essentially a rehash of the organization's failed COVID-era policies. Anthony reminds his readers of the WHO's gross negligence during the pandemic and its pandering to authoritarian regimes like China. The piece calls for strong action to protect Americans from harmful tactics that only increase the risk of another pandemic. FDD research analyst Jack Burnham has published a policy brief on our website examining China's dominance over the biotech industry. He stresses that Washington must prioritize domestic innovation and manufacturing to break Beijing's chokehold in this sector and to reduce U.S. dependence on China, which only enables China's efforts to weaponize biotech advancements. It's scary stuff, folks. More on that soon. And speaking of China, my colleague Mark Montgomery has a piece in the Washington Times addressing the growing threat that China poses to Taiwan. We all know this, but we probably don't see how all the different ways that Beijing is working overtime to undermine U.S. ability to defend its Indo-Pacific ally. Monty, as we call him, stresses that only sustained, well-resourced efforts by America and its allies can reverse this perilous trend. That's going to do it, folks. Stick a fork in it because we're done. If you want more smartness from our team, check out our website and peruse our social media. And please do support our work with the tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Monday for another riveting, fascinating, and otherwise can't miss episode of the FDD Morning Brief. Until then, enjoy your weekend. I'm Jonathan Schanzer signing off for FDD.